we had 77 rules for a drone to take off.
EU is on a terminal decline. So America's deep internal problems. Europe is busy with regulating plastic and all that. China has taken a quiet lead in technology. You look at their cars, you look at their drones.
It's not even quiet anymore.
Suddenly you're seeing DeepSeek come out, you're seeing their cars, their electric cars, to just see what they're doing. Where does India fit into this whole story now?
For the most part, a young population that adapts technology faster will actually win from this. So, for example, we are slowly becoming the office to the world, just like China is the factory to the world. We, I think, can reasonably aspire to be the office to the world. But in order to be the office to the world, we have to be in a position to be able to take these technologies and adapt them. So we have, for example, the last decade, we have removed about 170 odd million people out of extreme poverty. The extreme poverty, which is defined by the World Bank in PPP terms as $2.15 a day, that population has now fallen from something in the range of 16% to something in the range of 2% and falling. Mumbai, by the way, if you go and have a beer, you're supposed to have a permit. Now, nobody more than 2-3 people in the whole city probably have a permit for drink. So you have criminalized a normal activity. If the police so wants, it can then raid your house, catch you, send you to jail, by the way, on this. So you criminalize normal activities and you then have rent extracting. Now this is a major problem in India across all levels of government. Central government, state government, municipal, the Investor Education and Protection Fund. This is where shares go to die. This is basically somebody dies and the shares haven't been clearly said, it goes there, or you lose some shares, it ends up. All the shares, nobody has a clear claim, unclaimed, end up here. But then when the rightful owner turns up and tries to get it out, my God, it's complicated. And you have this with EPFO as well. So what have I done? One is, of course, you can make this automated by putting it online. But we have to be careful not to put the same old process online. So I discovered in IEPFO, for example, it takes 25 steps to get your money out. Not surprisingly, it gets jammed somewhere. And I know for a fact that there's a whole ecosystem of brokers who will help you take your money out for a cut of about 20%. Just imagine. And do you know how much money is stuck there? 90,000 crores worth of money is stuck in IEPFA.
Welcome to the Growing India podcast. I'm Monika Halan. The Growing India podcast is a joint initiative between Groww and me to talk about India's most pressing issues. Today, I have the charismatic Sanjeev Sanyal, who hung up his high finance suit for a band gala. Welcome to the podcast, Sanjeev.
Pleasure to be here.
Yours is one of the names which has come very often in the comment section for us to invite you, and here we are. I want to start actually by referring to some conversations that we have had earlier during COVID. And this was the time where you were in the Ministry of Finance. There was global pressure on India to spend 10% of our GDP to throw at COVID. There were op-eds, there was social media pressure, there was a huge pressure on all of you to do what the US and the global north was doing. I remember you had two arguments. You said, one, we don't have the money. We are still a poor country. We cannot destabilize our fisc by doing that much of spending. And second, you said, what is the point of spending when the economy is stalled? Like, why press the accelerator when we are standing still? Let's back end the spend. We will spend, not 10%, whatever we spend. So we took our own route. And in fact, the FM took the opportunity during that COVID budget 21 to bring the off-balance sheet items on budget. So a lot of cleanup happened in that crisis. I think the results are there for all of us to see. The US went from almost zero inflation to 8-9%. We went from 6 to 8, which is not bad at all. And today, 2025, our macros are looking fantastic. We've got a gym body. US is bloated. I think it's an opportunity for you to talk about the challenges, because you know what, when policy goes wrong, everybody sees. But when you get policy right, there is not even a ripple of what happened. So some of the challenges and what made you take those decisions. So basically recount that for us.
So Monika, you will remember that at that time, you're talking about 2020 March onwards, And of course, the world has broken down. And you have to understand all of these decisions are being made under a situation of extreme uncertainty. We don't only have economic uncertainty, there's actually a medical crisis that's happening, and nobody knows what's going on, really. So a lot of this decision making, you have to understand, is being taken under circumstances of extreme uncertainty. Now, under that, the pressure was, as you know, we shut down large parts of our economy, as did much of the rest of the world, because of a lockdown. Now, when you do that, of course, there is a shock to livelihoods and so on. And so, not surprisingly, many countries, including us, decided that we need to provide some sort of a support. The question is, how do you do it? The received wisdom of so-called experts at that time was that go out there and spend money. And why do you want to do that? Because, a lot of what happens is that basically there is liquidity crisis. I can't pay you, you can't pay him, he can't pay me, we all go bust. So keep money circulating in the system, somehow keep the system running. So there is a lot of pressure on government to sort of provide some support, which is fair enough. However, the particular way in which everybody wanted this to be done is by essentially spending and sending out some kind of stimulus checks to everybody. And of course, to do massive monetary easing. And you will remember, there were, NRI economists based in the US. There were sort of Nobel laureates like Stiglitz, all advising us on what we should be doing. But the Indian approach was throughout very different for a number of reasons. The first point is, quite apart from the issue of, we have limited resources, so we need to be quite judicious about it, was that we fundamentally understood the problem differently from the way these so-called famous economists did. Most of them saw it as a conventional demand shock. But the point that I had made even at that point was that it wasn't actually a demand shock at all. It was a supply shock. There were people willing to spend money. You were willing to spend money. I was willing to spend money. We weren't allowed to spend the money because we were, not allowed. The malls were closed, the shops were closed, the restaurants were closed. So this was not a demand problem. There was demand. This was a supply shock where we didn't allow anybody to spend. So that was the point that, look, what is the point of pressing the accelerator when you've got your foot on the brake? That was the context. All you'll do if you're just pushing more and more money out is that it'll just get bloated into the same pipelines of demand that were already had demand in it. So what was the point? You had blocked the outlet for that pipeline. So that was the first point that we were making. So we decided that we will at some point spend, but we will only spend it when you begin to have enough of the economy open for allowing those pipelines of demand to function, which we did eventually by, in 21 onwards, spending very heavily on capital expenditure, the infrastructure rollout. So that was one part of the view. Now, that doesn't mean you don't do anything. You have to provide support, for example, to MSMEs and so on. So what do you do? Most countries, what they did is they sent stimulus checks to everybody. I'm not saying that it's not necessary to provide some support. I'm just saying what happened in many of those cases, a large part of it was this money just disappeared into ether. A lot of it was misallocated, stolen, and so on. All we said, look, for the very, very poor, we will provide some amount of direct cash transfer, which we did through the Jan Dhan system. But many people said, oh, this is very little money. This will not reinflate the economy. By the way, we are not attempting to reinflate the economy. All we are doing is making sure that nobody starves. So very poor people using the Jan Dhan system, direct transfer of some money, and of course made available food to people. So look, as I said, jaan hai to jahan hai. So this is just a safety net. This is not a reinflation plan. In the same way, we were scared of this liquidity gridlock problem, where, as I said, I don't pay you, you don't pay him, he doesn't pay me, we all go bust. For that, we solved that problem without using stimulus checks, but by giving bank guarantees. So we said, look, if I don't remember the number exactly, but I think 80% of every MSME's payments were guaranteed under those circumstances. So effectively, we didn't make it 100% because you want some skin in the game for the person. But effectively what happens is that you are not panicking about the fact that I'll pay. You know that the government, worst case, will pay you 80%. And similarly, he doesn't have this problem and I don't have the problem. So that gridlocking problem didn't happen. And we managed to keep the system consequently liquid at a fraction of the cost through this guarantee. Now, you cannot do this eternally, but you can do it for a short period of a year or so. And so the cash flow of the system didn't jam up, which was the risk. Now, in other countries, for putting large amounts of money to keep this cash flow flowing, we did it with just a guarantee. In the end, very, very few people went bust. Because if you're not scared the other guy is going to go bust, you don't force the system. So that cascading bankruptcies and insolvencies that could have happened, particularly the MSME sector, didn't happen. So 1 or 2 percentage points of money guaranteed 98% of the system. Whereas in other countries, they were paying 20-30% of money to keep that same effect. So through the fact, one is correctly diagnosing this as a supply side shock rather than demand shock. Two, solving the cascading bankruptcy problem using a guarantee as opposed to stimulus checks. And then doing some timing. So when we did begin to spend, we did spend it in a particular way, not through stimulus checks, but by creating assets. So the other point that we made at that time, you will remember, and by the way, all of this it's not with great 2020 hindsight. All of this was written by me in articles at that time, in interviews. You can go and see the Honorable Finance Minister has made this point. It's there in the economic survey of that time. And result of which, yes, our debt to GDP ratio went up, but it didn't blow up. We did not turn, in the monetary side, we didn't turn on the printing presses. So we got some inflation upside, but then it came down and now it's running at 3% something, which is quite reasonable. Our debt to GDP ratio went up, but it's coming down. We have regained control of the fiscal. We have regained control of the monetary policy. And a very important thing, our banking system remains extremely well capitalized. Do remember that our banking system, oddly enough, came out of the COVID crisis on the other side actually better than it went in, because we had initiated the bank cleanup before COVID. Some part of it has already happened by the time COVID hit, but that momentum didn't get disrupted, continued, and today we have a banking system that is in very good shape. If we had gone down the rabbit hole, which people like Joe Stiglitz were telling us, then I'm sorry, we would have actually been in very bad shape. The banking system would be in tatters right now. Never mind the fiscal and other macro indicators.
So do you feel vindicated? Because it is very difficult to do something when the entire global conversation and all the people who sort of matter in the intellectual space are all telling you something else. So just like a short answer on, is there a sense of vindication? Because look, today our macros are looking fantastic. Like you said, the banking cleanup, which began earlier, our banks are looking good. Fiscal deficit is under control. Inflation is down. So we are like ready to go right now.
Absolutely. So our macros are in great shape. We are now in a position, if the global environment becomes conducive, we can now accelerate past 7% with ease and stay there for a long period of time, because we have really cleaned up the macro stability indicators. And by the way, it wasn't just during the COVID period. Even before COVID, we were ignoring a lot of the so-called advice that has been coming. For example, in the cleanup of the banks, the advice throughout from so-called experts was create a bad bank. And if you will remember, even at that time, he said, look, if you create a bad bank, all I will get is a warehouse for bad assets, which will be kept alive forever with taxpayer money. We have done this before. It's called BIFR. Yeah. So I was very against creating this bad bank. And of course, I had this conversation with Arun Jaitley ji at that time. I had just joined in 2017 and said, look, why don't we use the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code? And he liked the idea. And then, it was an untested system. But the net result is we did bankrupt a bunch of very large companies. Did anything greatly tragic happen? No. Most of those assets got purchased by others who use them. And in fact, now we have created more jobs in it than existed to start with. So, we have to be, that was just a case where we had to be confident about our own ideas of creative destruction and other things that I have been arguing for some time. And it came out well. Same thing happened with COVID. We took our own view that this is a supply shock, not a demand shock. We took our own view that guarantees were a better way of stopping financial gridlocking as opposed to providing inordinate amounts of supply stimulus checks and so on. And again, we had advice from all these people. The first point is that we need to now be a little confident of ourselves. Yes, much of this advice will come. We should listen to it, no problem. But in the end, we have got to use our own judgment. And yes, we are feeling vindicated by this. Given the amount of criticism that we faced and sometimes personal attacks, not just on social media. I mean, I've gone to conferences and so on and basically been called, as if I'm heartless because I'm not going and spending all the money on all kinds of things. Yes, I do feel vindicated, and I don't have any problem calling out this whole cabal of sort of what I call are just herd economists that just solve every problem. Since they know you should do stimulus, so therefore if you have one hammer, then everything looks like a nail. So they were going around trying to solve a supply side problem with a demand side solution. And you see what happened to all of them.
We just have to look at America's debt and see where they're at to see the problems with this let's inflate the economy. I want to come to the other issue of inequality, where again there is this global debate on who is unequal, by what metric do we see it. So I track the World Bank data. So Gini coefficient is a measure, just for the purpose of telling the viewers, where a Gini of 0 means that you're all perfectly equal. And a Gini of 1 means that one person has all the wealth. Obviously, these two extremes are not possible. Economists say that a Gini of about 30% or less is good.
0.3.
So 0.3 or 30%, 0.3. India has been at around 0.32 for many years. Like, it's been around that 0.3 number. And recently when I see it, it had dropped to 0.25. And there's been a downward trend on the Gini, and 0.25 is putting us among the top 5 countries in the world in terms of equality. But this is not our lived reality in terms of when we just think about the dispersion of income. The debate now moves to saying that, look, World Bank tracks 2 indices, the consumption and the income. Because countries like India don't have good income statistics, they're looking at consumption statistics, which is not a good measure of inequality. So one is that I think the viewers should know what is it that you think as part of the government on this metric called the Gini and its efficacy in India, for India. And also, if the statistics on income and consumption are so far away, why does the World Bank give us one list? Why does it not segregate between, okay, these are the statistics for income and these for consumption, and then we can make adequate comparisons? So inequality, how do we think about it in India?
So first of all, as you yourself pointed out, inequality is a tricky thing to measure in any country, not just in India. So don't go down this rabbit hole again. Oh, Indian statistics is poor. You can criticize every country's statistics on this count. Now, what the Gini coefficient does is, and you can do this on many counts. There is inequality in many dimensions. You can look at inequality of consumption. You can look at it for income, as you said, but you can even look at it for wealth, or there could be some other indicator as well of inequality. You could do it by social indicators also, of education, health, etc. So you can look at inequality in multiple ways, because inequality is a generic idea. It's not some objective thing. It's a subjective space where you can think of inequality in multiple ways. What you are, I think, referring to is a recent World Bank report which showed that India would be number 4 or 5 in terms of equality on a consumption Gini equivalent. And we should take this in that space alone. This is not to conflate to that we are now the most equal society on the planet. Absolutely not. It is for the very limited requirement of consumption. For whatever reason, the richest and poorest people in the country tend to consume within a much closer band than in many other countries. That's all it is saying. And, that is also not too far away from lived reality, because if you look at the super rich in India, for example, other than spending on some very expensive weddings, which you may or not want, we don't see the kind of sort of highfalutin spending you see, for example, on super yachts and other things in other countries. So the consumption of even our super rich is actually quite tame, with the one exception of weddings, compared to those of the super rich in other countries. That may be. So it's not off the scale in terms of our lived reality either. However, it is also true at the same time that the income and wealth, and there are some indicators of those, are suggesting much greater inequality. Important that you take all of these things with pinches of salt. India is not as equal as the consumption basket suggests. It is also not as unequal as the likes of Piketty or Oxfam are trying to suggest, because one uses income, other uses wealth. They are also agenda-driven research, and so if you really go down that rabbit hole, you will find that there are all these indicators that are even more fishy. In fact, if anything, the consumption one is based on slightly better data pool than one. But my view is that anybody who is looking into the inequality debate needs to understand that we are neither the most equal or the most unequal. These are various indicators. Take them all with a pinch of salt. My own personal view is that we should not get too tied up into the inequality debate at all. There is a much more important debate to be had, with which we tend to confuse it, which is the removal of poverty. Removal of absolute poverty is really the game. If I am removing a lot of people out of poverty, if a few people are also becoming very rich as a result of it, how do I care? My really focus should be on whether or not really poor people are becoming less poor. On this, India is doing a very, very good job. Again, the World Bank itself has issued, but this is also our lived reality, that the very, very poorest section of our society is now becoming smaller, and many of them are transitioning into the lower edges of the middle class. So we have, for example, the last decade, we have removed about 170 odd million people out of extreme poverty. The extreme poverty, which is defined by the World Bank in PPP terms as $2.15 a day, that population has now fallen from something in the range of 16% to something in the range of 2% and falling. Take another benchmark, there also the numbers will show us a similar decline. You can take whatever benchmark you want, the decline is real. And my own argument is, this is the real achievement. The inequality debate is really the debate on envy. What we should really care about are the poorest people in the country, which is this idea of Antodaya. What is Antodaya? The person at the end. So the end of the thing, uska uday ho jaye. Ant mein jo khada hai, uska uday ho. Antodaya. So Antodaya, that idea is a much better idea, but it is an idea of absolute poverty. And we are doing well in that, and we should continue down that path. As a result of becoming a more dynamic economy, you have a large population. In a dynamic economy, a few people will become very rich. We should, if they are contributing to creating investments and so on and becoming very rich as a result, we should not begin to think that that is somehow a bad thing. After all, we are 1/6 of the world's population. We should aspire, in fact, to have 1/6 of the world's billionaires. Why not? After all, many of these Piketty, Oxfam types, they are funded by whom? You go and look at their funding. That comes from Rockefeller Foundation, Ford Foundation, Soros's Open Society, Omidyar. Who are all these people? They're all billionaires. They have no problem with billionaires as long as they are white, but they seem to have a problem with they are brown. So I am against this politics of envy. We should focus on removing absolute poverty. And yes, all these indicators of Gini, etc. are interesting. We should take them all with a pinch of salt, including the ones in which we look good.
Also, I think what you said about pulling people out of poverty, it'll be counterintuitive to think that India has pulled out millions out of poverty. We have a massively increasing middle class, and we have increasing inequality. I mean, it doesn't. So I think people should also just use common sense to say, if these two things are true, then it's possible that we are moving towards growth with redistribution. So the model that
No,
India has...
a certain level of redistribution is happening. I mean, if you're pulling, you see, if you're pulling people out of poverty into the middle class, surely that is a good thing. Let's say you're near a very high wall. Everybody is on the bottom in the beginning. Now you put a ladder up there and you ask one person to climb to the top. Then another person climbs to the top. Now during the period in which you're taking people up the wall, there is inequality because some people are at the top, some people are at the bottom. Now, is this an argument for saying that we should never put up a ladder?
So perfect becomes the enemy of good. I mean,
Absolutely.
that's what I have noticed.
It's in fact not possible.
It's not possible.
Because the ladder will only allow one or two people to go up at a time. And by that way, as people get to the top of that thing, after all, there's no limits to growth. So therefore, there is another wall to climb on the other side of that wall, and so on and so forth.
A lot of times, I think some of these narratives are meant to sort of break this newfound confidence that we have as Indians. We're holding our head high, and this barrage of messaging which comes that you are unequal, there is this, that so somewhere I feel it's attacking us at a core of
so it is basically meant to make us feel guilty for seeing becoming an economic power. Of course, we are a poor country. We are aware of this. We can see it all around us. Many of us have, within a few generations, being quite poor. Gone through partition and all kinds of things where things have gone very badly wrong. So it isn't the fact that we are unaware of the problems, but to have this view that, if any Indian is doing well because somehow we should feel guilty about it, this is a deliberate attempt to essentially pigeonhole us into a certain space. It's the same idea behind that. I think it was a New York Times or Washington Post cartoon, where you had, ISRO sends us thing into space, and you have this image of a chap with a cow, and he's trying to become a space power. By the way, there is a large group of people in India who parrot this thinking. You haven't fixed fixed line telephony. Why are you doing mobile? I remember this conversation in the mid-90s. It turned out we didn't need to do fixed line telephony. We just bypassed it and went into mobile. So we need to have that kind of attitude about other things as well. Why do we always have to allow others to guilt trip us every time we are trying to progress up the line? After all, do we say, no, but why are we trying to win an Olympic gold medal when there are so many poor people in this country? Everything is going to be down to the lowest common denominator. What is being told? That do not aspire to anything more. Why? Because when we begin to aspire to something greater, we are a threat to the established order. This is the same thing, by the way, which China was being told. And by the way, I am also witness to this in a country which people now think has been rich for a long time, which is Singapore. I actually lived in Singapore from the 90s to the 2000s. In the 1990s, Singapore was very newly rich. There were still parts of Singapore where you could see, poverty. And I remember there was a whole class of journalists, Asia correspondent journalists, who used to live in Singapore. And all their time they used to spend on criticizing how bad Singapore was on various counts. So I used to keep saying, why do you live here then? Why don't you go and live in other places that you think were so wonderful, so dynamic? And by the way, all the places that they thought very dynamic and wonderful, they never lived in, and many of them ended up having the Asian crisis. I won't name those places, but basically all those places went down with the Asian crisis and never came back. Singapore continued to be, now it's become, of course, a very, very rich and very expensive place as well. But I'm just telling you, at that point in time, people used to mock, you're not allowed to litter in Singapore. So why do you want people to litter?
Right. We are beginning to enjoy the fruits of growth, and this has been on the back of reform. And I have heard you say before, and I absolutely agree, that beyond the big reforms of the 91, the GST, the IBC, all of those reforms, now probably is the time to unclog the pipes, the process reforms, which you have spoken a lot about. So one, I think just tell the viewers a little bit about what process reforms means, and also a few examples. Again, I remember you talking of this telecom rule which made working from home illegal, and how it was removed during the COVID period and how it quickly came back. So this tension between the bureaucracy, who wants to seek rent, and for you as an individual to be inside the machine trying to bring out this reform. So just a few maybe stories on this.
Okay, so you know what I mean by process reforms. You see, people love large structural reforms. Now, what are structural reforms? Structural reforms are something that changes the structure of some activity. So, GST is a good example, or the original 91 reforms, or insolvency and bankruptcy. There are many such structural reforms, and there are more that can be done. And I mean, there is a long conversation to be had on the judicial system, for example, which needs structural reform now. But I have been long arguing that a lot of what we need is actually not structural reform, but getting that activity, not changing its architecture or framework, but simply making it happen a little bit more efficiently. So there's this interest in government efficiency thanks to Doge and what Milei is doing in Argentina and so on. So my argument is, look, this is something we should be doing here, and I have been working on this now for some time. And there are many of them that this government has done. I mean, the Honorable Prime Minister has really been a support in this, because obviously a lot of it requires pushing back against bureaucracy, as you mentioned, but also against, by the way, the private sector. There are a lot of entrenched interests that want to perpetuate this. So, for example, we had 77 rules for a drone to take off. And interestingly, people don't realize civil aviation rules used to apply even to kites and balloons, by the way, technically. And it's there in the Civil Aviation Act. So, of course, what you do is you criminalize even normal activities. And by virtue of criminalization, you're giving the bureaucracy certain powers that, should they feel like, they can tie you up in. We still have this, by the way, in Mumbai. Mumbai, by the way, if you go and have a beer, you're supposed to have a permit. Now, nobody more than 2-3 people in the whole city probably have a permit for drink. So you have criminalized a normal activity. If the police so wants, it can then raid your house, catch you, send you to jail, by the way, on this. So you criminalize normal activities, and you then have rent extracting. Now, this is a major problem in India across all levels of government: central government, state government, municipal. And so let me tell you the story of this thing that you raised up, the OSP regulation, other service providers regulations. So till 2020, the telecom ministry had rules called other service providers regulations, which effectively meant that anybody doing any commercial work using a telecom system was liable to get, for each location, a permit, a special permission to do it. So technically speaking, work from home was illegal. So all of you who are watching, I'm afraid you are all doing something illegal, right? Now, the telecom officials were clever enough not to bother the average person. What they, however, did is that if you were running a BPO or IT-enabled service of some sort, they would insist that you had to go to them and take some permission for these OSP regulations. And not surprisingly, there were lots of delays, and not mention lots of rent seeking as a result of this. There was an entire legal profession. There were lawyers who specialized in getting these permissions. You had to pay them a lot of money, which they shared with somebody in the telecom service, and that's how it went. Now, I bumped into this by pure chance. You see, when in March 2020 the lockdown was put, you suddenly had a notification from the telecom ministry stating that now that this lockdown had happened, they would allow the OSP regulations of 2008 or whatever it was, would now be held in abeyance to allow people to work from home. Now, when I read this, I was shocked, because I was under the impression that work from home was allowed anyway. Now, I'm a suspicious sort of chap. So when I read this sort of thing, I think that, look, what the telecom ministry is actually saying is that, look, we are letting you off for now, but do remember that these rules actually apply, because they basically said till December of this year, because of this, we will allow it. After that, these rules will again apply. So actually what they were signaling to everybody is that don't forget us. These rules apply when we will come back. So that is basically what they were signaling. Now, having discovered this, I began digging more, and then I discovered that this was something in which probably hundreds of crores of graft probably happened. And this was the single biggest constraint to the growth of GCCs in the country at that time. I talked to many of them. They said, look, we can't grow because we sent application up for, and it doesn't come back. I talked to certain officials and I could see that they were very happy with the current system. And they gave me all kinds of reasons, security, this, that, the other. So I knew this was so. So I took this whole matter. I then took it to the Honorable Prime Minister, and the political leadership was totally behind me. I then showed it to Ravi Shankarji, who was then the telecom minister. I had full support from that. Interestingly, I also had support from some of the very senior civil servants as well. So for all the criticism I do of the civil service, let me say that a lot of my reforms get done because there is many of them who do help me out. There were also one lawyer, I'll mention him, Rahul Mathan, who is a classmate of mine from school, who based in Bangalore, and he helped me. Ironically, Bangalore-based lawyers, most of them made careers out of basically managing this particular thing. So then we changed everything. In November 2020, we came out with one set of reforms. But then when it came out, I also noticed that at the last minute, 2-3 random lines were added in there, which effectively allowed some of the old regulations to continue. So again, in June 2021, I did another round of this and then completely cleaned it out. The net result of this is that something like 50% or more of the compliance required for running IT-enabled service of some sort disappeared. And so, and by the way, when all of this was done, all the people in the IT industry, from Nandan Nilekani, Mohandas Pai, etc., so it was not an unknown thing. In that industry, everybody knew about it, and they had never imagined it would go. So once it went, you then saw this explosion of GCCs that you had in the last 5 years. So this outsourced BPO type of business has been happening from the 90s, call centers and this and that. But this thing that you had in the last 5 years of global capability centers, which are really at the cutting edge, one of the things that has enabled it was the removal of the OSP regulations.
That's just fantastic to hear. And what is almost mentally daunting is that this is one small place.
Yes.
And multiply that by 10,000 or 1 million. And you look at what could possibly happen to India in terms of growth.
Yes. And there are many such reforms that happened during that period and have continued to happen. I mean, as I was telling you about, there was an officer called Manhar Yadav. He's now in Taiwan, but he was then in PMO. He and I together did a whole bunch of reforms. And we opened up the geospatial sector. Maps in India used to be the monopoly of the Survey of India. So technically, any map you did, if this book had a map on its cover, you had to go and get special permission from Survey of India. Again, unnecessary delays. And so we said, why don't we open it up? So just so that you know, Google Maps, which was already popular by 2020-21, everybody was using it, was technically illegal in India, even though Google Maps is actually an Indian invention. It was invented in Google's Hyderabad or Chennai offices. Lalitesh was the person who helped build the Google Maps system. He's an Indian based in India. And yet in India, technically, Google Maps was actually technically illegal. So again, this monopoly was taken away from Survey of India. Similarly, space was opened up. I told you about the drones rules. It was quite funny because neither Manhar and I knew anything about drones. So in fact, we found somebody in Noida who manufactured drones, and I think it was the Diwali of 2020. We two of us said, okay, let's go, and we had a holiday. Both of us would never be able to coordinate, but we managed to find a drone manufacturer and went there to see what they did before we were messing around with the rules. And then we reduced those rules from 77 to 7, and so on and so forth. So a whole bunch of these reforms got done, and now we have continued to do them. For example, the effort it took to just shut down a company voluntarily in the country. Again, this is something which I worked with a young colleague of mine called Akanksha Arora, and we presented the process that it went through. And so that process and where it used to get stuck, I mean, among the many things it got stuck, NOCs, etc., one place it used to get stuck is at the registrar of companies. When you'd got all the NOCs, everybody agreed it was okay to shut down a company. You had to get it advertised in a newspaper. The ROC, the registrar of companies, was supposed to do this, and they would take months to do this. And of course, as you can imagine, you actually have to somebody had to pay them off. So now what has happened? The entire thing has been replaced. Now there's a website or a web-based system called CPACE. There, essentially, all the NOCs, etc., are automatically, departments are asked after 21 days. If they don't respond, it is granted. A list generated by the system and sent to the registrar of companies. If they have an objection, they have to write in writing why they object. Otherwise, default, it goes into advertising. Net result is shutting down a company which used to take over 500 days. Now it takes 60 days. We are faster than pretty much any country in the world. And like that, I'm now looking at IEPFA. Many of you who are not aware what it is, it's the Investor Education and Protection Fund. This is where shares go to die.
This is Ministry of Commerce.
This is Ministry of Corporate Affairs.
Corporate Affairs.
Okay, and this is basically somebody dies and the shares haven't been clearly said. It goes there, or you lose some shares, it ends up. All the shares, nobody has a clear claim, unclaimed, end up here. But then, when the rightful owner turns up and tries to get it out, my God, it's complicated. And you have this with EPFO as well. I've raised both of these. By the way, I'm quite vocal about them in public. And as I said, I'm able to do this largely because I have the support of the top political leadership and also senior civil servants as well to get this done. So what have I done? One is, of course, you can make this automated by putting it online. But we have to be careful not to put the same old process online. So I discovered in IEPFO, for example, it takes 25 steps to get your money out. Not surprisingly, it gets jammed somewhere. And I know for a fact that there's a whole ecosystem of brokers who will help you take your money out for a cut of about 20%. Just imagine. And do you know how much money is stuck there? Something like 90,000 crores worth of money is stuck in IEPFA. Then there is others as well. EPFO, I don't know how much, but even more money is there. And this is not only about people who can't get their own money out. Just imagine if that person dies and how difficult it is for their heirs to get that money back. And this is the money of poor people. At least IEPFA is mostly middle class or maybe rich people. This is EPFO is of poor people. So a lot of work is going into that.
How long will it take? Because this is going to be of huge interest to so many viewers. Because, I get tagged on so many of these tweets and all. So, it is a nightmare. And the brokerage, these sharks in the middle.
I have raised both these issues at the highest level. There's support. I'm personally not tracking EPFO because I believe there is the Honorable Minister is himself working on this. So that one I am not personally tracking. I raised the issue, but I am not tracking it. But IEPFA, I'm personally working on reforming it, and let's see what happens. It may take a few iterations, but I'm quite determined to clean it.
Okay, so given your track record, I think it's really good news for investors. I'm going to move to urbanization. And again, I've read a lot of what you've written about urbanization. Urbanization is good. India is now living in urban centers. We don't want to go back to the villages. But the lived reality of urban India is terrible. So there is choked drains, there's cattle, there's garbage, there's the municipal function doesn't work. So I don't know why citizens don't protest, how they should protest. We are just building our own bubbles.
We protest.
How do we do it?
The problem is that we have an intellectual failure. Just like we had this 5-year plan idea of economic management, no matter how much effort you put into it, it was going to give you bad outcomes. We have the same intellectual failure when it comes to cities. Because we have been captured by this idea that Le Corbusier was a great urban designer. Okay, and that Chandigarh is some sort of a great urban design plan. It is not. It is possibly in many ways the worst possible design. It's effectively a subsidy scheme for civil servants and mostly retired civil servants, not even today's civil servants. You cannot build cities based on that because you're using up too much land to keep too many people. It's too distributed. Urbanism is about concentration and managing that concentration. If you go to Hong Kong or you go to New York or you go to Singapore even, everybody loves going to Singapore and say, oh, it's so well. It is because of concentration, because that concentration allows you to make economic decisions about land monetization, about creating public transport systems. You cannot create public transport systems in a dispersed environment. It only works when you concentrate it. So, most of urbanism is about managing concentration. How you do it, you can go about it, we can have the conversation. But the first thing you've got to understand is that dispersal is not urbanism. Because if you disperse it, for example, every time we build a highway, you get ribbon developments. It is not possible to bring STP tanks, roads, everything onto that, or garbage clearance in those ribbon developments. You have to focus and concentrate them into certain area where you can manage it. So first thing, we got to throw Le Corbusier out of our head. That decongestion is not urbanism. Managing congestion is urbanism. Right? So, please throw Le Corbusier out of your head. In most of the world, he's considered a fascist. Almost everything he's built in the world is dysfunctional. You go to the Bailo just outside of Paris, not the good parts of Paris, but the bits outside, all of them are basically effectively slums. Everything that he built. Nobody thinks he's great. In India also, young people growing up in Chandigarh move to Gurgaon. Gurgaon walas don't go to Chandigarh. So the future, in my view, even for Chandigarh, is not the bit that Le Corbusier built. It is actually Mohali, which is outside of his design. So once we have got that out of the way, then let us talk about what we can do. We have to build concentrated infrastructure. And that has to allow continuous evolution. So one of the places, one good example of how this can go about, let's say, is what we are doing in Bombay. In Mumbai, we are now, finally, we are building on top of what the British built. Mumbai has so far functioned on 2 highways and 2 train lines. And those 2 train lines were basically built in the late 19th century, upgraded a little bit in the early 20th century, but even the train designs, those bogies you have, you go back and look at 1930, that was when the last upgrade of our bogie design happened on that. Now, a century later, we are finally building out the metro system, the external coastal road. We are building a new airport. All of this could have, by the way, have been done years ago. But anyway, we are now doing it. And we have to be willing to continuously adjust. And ironically, there are far more people living in these places like Worli today with those tall buildings than there used to be. And there are less congestion there than there used to be. Why? So basically, it is about building the infrastructure for concentration, not decongesting it. Everybody says decongestion. Number one. Number two, we have got to stop doing something called master plans, or at least the way we understand it. So Singapore, for example, has a master plan, but it is an evolving landscape. We, on the other hand, have a waterfall view of what master plan is, i.e. some wise master planner will think how a great city will be built, and then he will implement it. And if it all goes belly up, he will say, see, the master plan was good, but the implementation was bad. I'm sorry, that is maybe a good way to build a car, if at all. I'm not even sure of that. But organic things like financial systems, these are complex adaptive systems. Financial systems, languages, and cities, which are organically evolving, you have to have continuous adaptation. You cannot have a waterfall view. You have to have how you do software, agile, continuously feedback loop your way forward. So you have to continuously adjust. So you have to allow adaptive reuse. You have to do all these kinds of continuous change. But everybody has this view, no, we need to have this great wise person who built. So even in Delhi, let's now come to Delhi and I'll show you how the opposition comes to this view. You may think that it's obvious that a living city should have continuous adaptation. But in fact, when you do it, look at the kind of pushback you get. Okay? Let's take the Central Delhi Vista project. Okay? What are we trying to do? We said that we need a new parliament, huge opposition. Oh, what will happen to the ghost of Lutyens? He'll feel so bad. Why? Then we said, no, we need to have some modern offices we want 21st century services from the central government. You need 21st century offices. Go to Shastri Bhavan. Why is anybody objecting to Shastri Bhavan being pulled down? There should be national celebration. It's the worst designed building you can possibly design. In fact, there are a few of these old buildings which I think should be actually preserved, particularly the building of the SPA, which is supposed to be training architects. It's one of the ugliest, most dysfunctional buildings in the whole country. And I think it should be a monument to bad design. So, anyway, there was huge opposition that happened. Evidently, some jamun trees were getting cut, which is utter nonsense. But look at the thinking, how it jams our progress. Similarly, you have North Block and South Block. Now, North Block and South Block are wonderful looking buildings. Nobody is pulling them down. But they are completely unfit for 21st century officers. Let me tell you, as a person who worked there at a very senior level, as principal economic advisor, I had one of the best rooms in North Block. Okay? And I can tell you, even then, my own life was good, but all my subordinates used to sit in horrible cubby holes somewhere in the building. There were rats, monkeys, all kinds of things. Look, it doesn't function as a modern building at all. So a new building has been built for the finance ministry. All those guys are being moved out. This is a good thing. Now, those buildings are good looking and they're a part of history. I am fully in favor of looking after them. But I now think you need adaptive reuse. Turn them into museums, which is what is being done. Our National Museum will be there.
Yeah.
There are many good things out of this. First of all, this whole imagery, which is an imperial imagery that the officials will sit on a hill and look down on the subjects, that will be removed with a public space where everybody can enjoy themselves. There'll be nice restaurants there, and first of all, since it will be emptied out, it will give us a few years to clean up the wires and modernize all of that, which could not have been done in a functioning office. And then it will be a space that all citizens of this country and visitors to the country can enjoy. But look at the opposition at every stage you have, that, what will Baker think and the ghost of Lutyens think? This is completely crazy. And that is because we have in our mind this jammed view that, there's a great 5-year plan, should have been, was good, but it was implemented badly. Same thing. There was this great thing that Lutyens did and it should remain there for an office for all time to come, because that's what Lutyens originally imagined. Why? After all, you go to the Louvre. What was the Louvre? Originally, it was a palace. Then it was the finance ministry. Then it was later converted into a museum. Nobody objects to the Louvre being modern. In fact, then they built the glass pyramid, and it looks wonderful. And everybody agrees it was a great addition. And we carry on. So great cities adaptively move forward. They don't get caught up in this. Instead, what have we done in Chandigarh? Chandigarh, we have converted the plan by Le Corbusier into a heritage. So now you cannot further move and allow Chandigarh to evolve. This is crazy.
Right. So I want to now come to something which I think we have discussed in the past, and there is a lot of conversation on the lack of judicial reform. And this is one of the things which is holding back India's growth, right? So the lack of contract enforcement, property registration, minor disputes will take years. How do you carry out reform in something which is self-governing, where outside interference is not brooked? And they're living in the 18th century. They're in some other sort of space in terms of their entitlements and their work ethic.
So I think, I have raised this issue, and, there is a fatwa from the Tamil Nadu Bar Council against me for even suggesting that maybe these medieval vacations should be gotten rid of. But anyway, point is, I think there is general consensus now in the country that the judicial system is now the single biggest constraint to economic progress and Vikasit Bharat. And frankly, it is just simply functions as a medieval guild now. And it's just not about the judges. We blame there's a whole ecosystem, the bar council, the senior advocates, and the way the whole thing is run is like a medieval coterie. And the biggest beneficiaries of that are actually these senior advocates who earn outsized fees for certain cases, which would actually not, those kinds of fees are not charged anywhere in the world. They are the best paid lawyers in the world. So this system has to be changed. But the first thing we have got to understand, and this idea has to be generalized, that the judiciary is ultimately a part of the state, and they are basically there to provide a service like anybody else. A judge is a civil servant. who's supposed to provide service. So first of all, we should get rid of all this language we use. The language, when you send a petition to the judiciary, you have to call it a prayer.
That's right.
Why? Why is it a prayer? Who are we praying to? So I think, in fact, somebody should bring this up, that in a secular country, how can you be praying to the organ of the state?
It's a secular judge.
This is. So I think we need to begin to bring this whole thing down to something more modern and have a honest national public debate on this issue.
Okay. I want to move from local to global. So I recently met a Brussels bureaucrat, and very, very interesting conversations around a lot of issues. One of his views was that EU is on a terminal decline. So that's one thing he said, that having been inside that machine. He said the kind of Chinese dumping that EU sees, their customs cannot keep up with the pace of low value, low quality Chinese consumer goods which are coming. And there are platforms, like Temu is one of them, where literally there is no customer service. You just get a plastic wrapped packet which says good hairdryer. And if it doesn't work, it's 16 euros, you just buy another one. So when I go to Europe, my phone ads are full of the platform ads. I don't see them in India. What have we done? Like, how have we dealt with this sort of massive Chinese dumping?
So, of course, we have used tariffs and other things, but I think there's a case here of having a discussion about how bureaucracy effectively has strangled Europe. We all love criticizing the Indian bureaucracy, and quite often they deserve it. Sometimes they don't, but quite often they do deserve it. But Europe has been strangled by its own bureaucracy. And what has happened effectively is Brussels bureaucracy is out of control. You see, in the end, for all the criticism we do of our politicians, there is some sort of a feedback loop from the public to the administration. But the Brussels system is completely out of the control of the national governments, which are basically what are elected. There is a European Parliament, but the European Parliament has very little control over the European bureaucracy. And so, like all bureaucracies, they have continued to expand their powers till they have strangled the entire system. And now it's very difficult to get out of this. And so your friend who told you that Europe is in terminal decline, I don't know if you also took ownership of the fact that he and his ilk are the key reasons for this decline. There are many.
He did.
But
he said we are responsible.
Absolutely, fully responsible. And the amount of graft there is and how cleverly it is done is also incredible. So, for example, many of these these European Union, all kinds of rules they create. Some of it is self-serving, all these CBAM, ESG regulations, all of this is cynically created to create non-tariff barriers. But look at, there's another aspect to it which is not fully. These complicated rules are understood by a very few bunch of civil servants. Now, all these civil servants you will find, they will retire. They will then create a consultancy. And then they will advise large companies how to go around those same things. So there is an entire ecosystem of consultancies. Many of them have set them up with their sons and daughters.
Which is what this person is actually doing. So you're absolutely on point.
Absolutely.
This is exactly
You will
his
be
story.
amazed by the shocking nature of the amount of graft. By the way, and I know this because I began to see the early phases of this when I was working in Singapore, because they used to have their accounts in Singapore. Now they have their accounts in Dubai. And this is basically what they do. Therefore, this is eating up the system, and it's eating it up very, very fast. And you cannot criticize the European bureaucracy on anything because they are above it all. They have learned to use all the correct DEI type language to justify everything that they do. And while they are irritating for us because of CBAM, etc., and their tone of voice, condescending tone of voice that they use when you negotiate with them on anything. But frankly, the price that is being paid is ultimately we are the side game. The real price is being paid by the citizens of Europe.
Right. So this brings me to the question of India's place in the world. America's fighting very deep battles. Your EU, we know, is thinking about replacing plastic straws with paper straws. And recently I saw that if you try and open a plastic water bottle, the cap doesn't come off because it's attached, it's supposed to remain attached to the bottle. And the Brussels bureaucrats spent months in this regulation so that this bottle cap is not thrown away and yet goes back for recycling. So as a consumer, you can't drink because the cap hits you, the producers have more costs. So nobody wins. So Europe is busy with regulations like this, like how do you keep the cover of a plastic bottle attached to the bottle?
And this is at least maybe something I can justify also. But there are many regulations that are not even meaningfully, the size of the chair and what angle it should be. It should be ergonomic and so on. By the way, I used to work in Deutsche Bank in their Singapore offices for much of the time I was in Singapore. And we used to work on trading flows. Now, the nature of a financial trading flow, if anybody of you have worked on it, is that basically the persons next to you are within touching distance. That is how information flows happen. These are not badly paid people. They're all highly paid traders and research people, analysts, etc. So, but this is how it is. But somebody told me that this was in violation of European Union rules because the rules have been created with an industrial worker in mind. So, if I can touch my next door guy and next person, then effectively I am violating some European rule. Now, like this, you have created so many rules so they are ending up with the same problem I said about India. India also has the same problem. We are basically ending up criminalizing normal behavior and the price we pay for it. But we are paying for it at 3,000 per capita income. They are doing it 55,000 per capita income.
Right. So again, coming back to the question, so America's deep internal problems. Europe is busy with regulating plastic and all that. China has taken a quiet lead in technology. You look at their cars, you look at their drones.
It's not even quiet anymore.
It's now it's not quiet, but over the years, quietly they've just, suddenly you're seeing DeepSeek come out, you're seeing their cars, their electric cars, to just see what they're doing. Where does India fit into this whole story now?
So, well, there's one part of it is be a part of the global supply chain part of the thing. And then we are doing a reasonable job. We are signing these free trade agreements. We are inviting large companies like Apple, etc. to come here. We are building a big push into shipbuilding, for example. So this is one part of it. And there's enough talked about in this space. So I'm going to ignore it for this conversation because I think there has to be a bigger conversation on something which is not debated enough, which is India's role as an innovation hub, an R&D hub. Okay. Now, there were certain constraints that India genuinely did, i.e. our patent system wasn't up to speed. By the way, one of the process reforms I've worked quite hard on is getting the patent system working again. But this is not the real problem. The real problem is a mindset problem that India has about R&D. And this problem is there in the government, but I would argue it is even worse in our private sector. So all the criticism I do of the government, let me now get to our private sector. For all these years, whenever I asked our private sector, titans of industry, all of those who give 10 on 10 to every budget every year, why don't you do R&D? They would tell us that, Indian researchers are not good enough. It is too risky. All these kinds of arguments. And then try to change the discussion to some CSR activity their wife is doing in some village somewhere. I have now begun to catch them on this. And I have discovered that basically the thinking is, in large parts of our industry, is that effectively we shall some new technology will come up abroad. We will sign some sort of a deal with them, take the technology and recreate it here. Taking the lead and innovating something here is not creating a product here, is something that we simply don't aspire to. And this is, sometimes they'll say, oh, we are just starting out, we can't do this. But 3 generations, 4 generations out, many of these are billionaires. Why aren't they doing it now? Because this is a mindset problem that we have. And our education system is not giving us the great scientists. Well, first of all, those scientists are doing perfectly well when they go abroad. More importantly, now they are doing even well in India. The same infrastructure, the same evidently low skill scientists of India are running all these GCCs from every major company in the world. Every major company in the world has a R&D center now in India, and they are doing the bulk of the work in India. It's not that they are going to MIT and staying there and doing something. The same coming from our IITs, our second tier institutions. Our second tier institutions, in fact, work for ISRO and send satellites to the moon. So that was never the constraint. The constraint was cobwebs in our own head, inability to take risk. And that is because our business culture is not about taking risk, but for seeking protection. And while I'm okay with providing some level of protection to our industry against Chinese dumping, I have to say I'm not in favor of providing protection against new entrants of various kinds. And I have come to the found that, as I said, we talked a lot about process reforms. Let me tell you that the bulk of those reforms were either discovered by me or brought to me by a new person trying to be a new entrant into the sector, or ironically by bureaucrats themselves. Almost never, very rarely have industry bodies ever brought them to me. You would think the pressure would come from industry bodies? Almost never. Why? Because the industry bodies mostly represent incumbents. And incumbents actually like these regulations because they look at it as a protective moat against new entrants. So I am a big believer, as you know, of the Austrian school of economics. I believe in creative destruction. This also fits with my Hindu philosophy of, of continuous destruction and rebuilding. So this continuous destruction and rebuilding has to happen sociologically in our entrepreneur class. Otherwise, the third generation will go to Dubai, set up a family office and not do anything in India.
Right. Okay, so last couple of questions. I see myself as an early adapter of technology. I like to taste technology and see where the trends are going. And I think I will have a home robot in the next 7 to 10 years. I've picked out a name for the robot already, and my friends are fed up because I keep sending them Instagram reels about what these robots are going to do. I think you're a futurist. Where do you see the world going in terms of, imagine the future for me 10 years from now in terms of driverless cars, drone taxis, home robots? What does it look like?
So all kinds of things will happen, but let me tell you one thing. No matter what anybody is telling you, you'll have all kinds of unintended consequences and unintended directions in which all of this will go. So the first thing, let me tell you, as a policymaker, my job is not to spend a great amount of time trying to imagine where it will go. That is the job of entrepreneurs, scientists, etc. My job is to keep the system reasonably open for all these innovations to happen and to stop those who want to stop these innovations from being adopted. Because that is my problem. Because at every stage, there are interest groups who will create many, many excuses that, oh my God, this will lead to some bad outcome, and stop change. So, for example, artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence will almost certainly destroy a large number of white-collar jobs. Okay? What should our response to this be? Well, we should not do the response that trade unions in Kolkata did in the 80s when new computers were brought in. We have to have the thing that we will adapt and absorb them. Every technology has destroyed some jobs, but has created lots more jobs. After all, who knew that podcasting would be a profession, or social media influencer would be actually a job? So every technology destroys some jobs. So traditional media got killed, but social media created its own news platforms and news systems. So this will happen also with artificial intelligence. For the most part, a young population that adapts technology faster will actually win from this. So, for example, we are slowly becoming the office to the world, just like China is the factory to the world. We, I think, can reasonably aspire to be the office to the world. But in order to be the office to the world, we have to be in a position to be able to take these technologies and adapt them. For example, it is now possible for us, and assuming we have free trade agreements with US, we already have one with the UK, etc., provide all kinds of office services to pretty much everybody around the world. It would not have easily been possible for doing this, say, to learn everything about, say, the US legal system. But with an AI assist, you can reach there quite fast. And a combination of a little bit of skilling and a little bit of AI, we can begin to do things that you wouldn't be able to do sitting here in India for the rest of the world. But now we'll be able to do it. So I think we should just take it on board and absorb it as fast as possible. And we should do it in multiple other ways. At the same time, there will be some downsides to them. So in those areas, we do need to evolve our own regulatory systems, whether it's on privacy or misuses of or unintended consequences of the uses of AI. We need to be at the cutting edge of all of these things, not reacting to, oh, the Europeans did this, so we should. As I've already told you, the Europeans very often are creating rules and regulations that are not the ones to copy. We have to think for ourselves. So this whole approach we very often have is that when a new thing appears, that we employ some Gora consultancy to advise us on what to do. I'm sorry, their advice is no better than that of Stiglitz during COVID.
So Asimov had the 4 laws of robotics. He had 3, then he added 1 more. So I think they still hold good. What are Sanjeev Sanyal's rules for AI? Because regulations cannot be micro in AI. You need to have very, high-level laws in place. You cannot micromanage this technology. So what would be your...
So I have actually written a paper on this about a year and a half ago or 2 years ago. And it has been much debated as well. So let me give you a flavor of this. So when you're dealing with artificial intelligence, you have to understand you're dealing with an evolving beast. Okay? So it's a complex adaptive system. It is going in all kinds of directions that you cannot predict. And it has the capability of building its own linkages and evolutions. And very often explainability becomes quite rapidly quite difficult. Now, different countries have tried to do different things. Now, the American approach to this is largely self-regulate, allow laissez-faire to happen. That is the way they do it. UK also goes by and large in that direction. Their constraints to the system tends to be tort law, which is when things go bad, they don't mind putting few $1 billion fines on the system and just shut down large companies if necessary with these large tort laws. So that is the constraint they put on their system is do what you want, but do remember you will be severely punished if something goes wrong. Now, whether that will work or not in AI, I don't know, because there will be problems about who do you pin the blame for when things go wrong. But anyway, I'm telling you how they are going about it. My own view is that will also come to a sticky end. But anyway, that is the way they are doing it. The Europeans are doing it in a different way, which is that they have created a blueprint, typical bureaucracy, where they have decided that this is high-risk AI, low-risk AI, and so on, and buckets, and then they have... Look, how on earth do you know which bit of AI is higher risk and lower risk? It's evolving in different ways. Something quite innocuous could evolve into something quite dangerous. After all, one line of innocuous code shut down all the airports last year and ATMs around the world last year, you will remember. And that was a static code. Now imagine that you have a fluid AI-driven system. It could suddenly shut down all kinds of things. How does the European bureaucrat know which is which? All they are basically doing is creating a bunch of rules in which I'm telling you, they will very happily basically protect them. The bureaucracy will figure out a way to protect itself from blame when it happens. Meanwhile, it's actually slowing down innovation. So it's a classic example where it's not providing any protection, but is in fact slowing down innovation in Europe. That is basically what will happen there. Now, the Chinese have a version of what the Europeans are doing, except that the state itself is driving this. Now, this is also highly dangerous because the all-knowing Chinese state very often doesn't know what it is doing. The Wuhan virus is a very good example of something that went out of control and then affected the world. So they will end up with that as well. Some AI product will do something unintended and will infect. So none of these systems will work with a complex adaptive system because we human beings cannot predict. Not even the greatest experts in the system know where this is going. So here is something I have written. First of all, I think we need to create walls between different kinds of AI. This idea of AI of everything we as human beings should give up on this. Because otherwise, at some point in the not so distant future, on the day of your banks systems fail, on the same day your power systems will fail, your airlines will fail. If you infect everything, you will allow transmission of that shock through the entire system. So we should, as human beings, create walls between segments and not allow clean transmission across all AI systems. This should be a global agreement on this.
On critical infrastructure, let's say.
Yeah, and critical and non-critical also, because it's very difficult in this to judge what is critical, not critical. Okay. Number 2, you need to force regular explainability audits. Companies that are doing AI have to be able to explain their results, and you have to have audits doing that. Number 3, you need to have manual overrides. And at critical points in the system where when the system has to go to the next stage, it has to ask a human, can I proceed to the next level? And at multiple levels, you have to allow that. 4th, you have to ex ante set the skin in the game. Because what will happen, that something very bad will happen, but you won't be able to pin blame, because the guy who did the software will say, sorry, I got bad data. The data guy will say, the guy who did the sample survey did wrong, and then so on and so forth. So ex ante, in every case, you have to stick skin in the game. Who is the person who will be prosecuted when things go wrong? Has to be set up beforehand, not afterwards in a long, complicated case. Once you have done these 4 things, I think you'll get some sort of shock absorbers in the system. I don't think they're difficult to do. By the way, we do this routinely in other complex adaptive systems. One of them being financial systems. All of these apply already in the financial systems. In order to regulate financial systems, do I need to know where the stock market is going? No. In the same way, to regulate AI, I actually do not need to know where AI is going. I have to be agnostic to it, because I cannot predict it. Regulator, if he knows where AI is going, he would not be a regulator. He would be Elon Musk, right? So the regulator has to be agnostic to where it's going. So we do exactly the same thing. In financial markets, the regulator doesn't have to be Warren Buffett to be able to regulate.
Right.
They have done all of the same thing. We have these systems of Chinese walls between for separating companies and conflict of interest and all these issues. We have circuit breakers. We have skin in the game, in the sense that we already tell you that the directors of the company are an audit. We have regular audits already set up in the system. Every quarter you have to tell us how much money you made. All of these systems already exist for managing financial markets. The exact same thing can be created for AI. And I think we should take this up worldwide. In February, there will be a global AI summit in Delhi. As you know, the last one happened in France. It will happen now in India. We should raise this as something globally that we need to do, because all of this is so well interconnected that something blowing up in Argentina will knock out something in Bhutan.
Last question, Sanjeev. You've had unusual career journey. I've noticed that most people, by the time they're in their 40s, they lose that, the light goes out and the cynicism comes in. And I'm noticing it's happening younger and younger. I've met 25-year-olds who have the cynicism of what used to be a 65-year-old's views, How do you keep the light on? Something to tell to the younger audience of that it is really the journey.
Yes, it is the journey. And, this is not a journey I necessarily knew I was going to be on. When I was 18 years old, I had no idea what subject I wanted to study. The only thing I was sure of is that I'm not going to study any more literature and history and all the subjects. I was a science maths type. So I turned up in Delhi because I wanted to get out of Kolkata. There's Jyoti Basu's Kolkata. The only thing I was sure about, get out of Kolkata. So I turned up in Delhi, applied in various colleges. As I said, I'm a science maths type, so I could have ended up studying physics, biology, maths, or economics. At that time, my best friend took admission in Sri Ram College for economics. So Anupam Bhatnagar, if you're listening here, you're responsible. So I happened then to turn up at Sriram College and got admitted. So I studied economics. Then, after 3 years, I still wasn't very sure what on earth I wanted to do. I was quite sure I didn't want to be a civil servant like my father. And at that time, I was living in Moti Bagh, so I definitely didn't want to go back and live in Moti Bagh. So I happened to apply for one scholarship, which was a Rhodes Scholarship. I got some money to go to Oxford, so I went there and went there. Then I spent 3 more years, got 2 more master's degrees. Then at the end of that process, the money ran out, so there was an option to go and maybe continue doing PhD or something. I'm not an academic type. So the one thing I said, look, this is not for me. I need to find a job. Again, I didn't know what I wanted. Somebody in Singapore, a company which no longer exists called Crosby Securities, gave me a first-class ticket from London to Singapore to interview for a job as a financial markets economist. Now, at that stage, I could not have told you what on earth a financial markets economist is, but I got that job. And then I spent 22 years basically in financial markets. Then the end of that, here we are in 2025. And let me tell you what I do. I work for the government, which I didn't want to do. I live in New Moti Bagh, which is right next to where I grew up, and I definitely didn't want to do that. I thought I had left behind history and humanities and literature behind it at high school, but I am actually now known as a history book writer and of the exact field that I didn't want to do. And I didn't want to have anything to do with academia, which of course means that I'm the chancellor of Gokhale Institute. So first point to all young readers is please don't come to me for career advice, or at least not for career planning. I can give you career advice, which is that, look, let life happen. There are many interesting things that happen. Many of the things that I didn't think I would enjoy, I have ended up enjoying. And so, I'm not a naval architect. But I have, over the last couple of years, learned naval architecture and designed a Gupta period wooden ship, which is now in the water. And at the end of this monsoon, we'll attempt to sail it, and let's see if we can sail it to Oman. But the point I'm making it that I've done many, many things in life which I didn't set out to do. I enjoyed many of those things, and I continue to enjoy those things. So that's why I don't, just like for the economy, I am skeptical about this waterfall system of five-year plans. I mock the Le Corbusier's idea of rigid town planning. I think that is even true of life. I have not attempted to do many of the things that I ended up doing. But when I do something, I put my heart and soul into it, even if it was something that I initially didn't want to do. And I have found that if you play on the front foot on all of these things, you end up actually getting into it, and I have enjoyed things. I had to do many things through a career. You end up doing a lot of things you have no interest in. I mean, who would think I was doing process reforms? I mean, I hate bureaucratic wrangles. What do I do all day these days? Go through processes, rules and regulations. Rule number 43C, subsection D, 3 words have to be changed, and then fighting with various people to change it. The most meticulous, painful thing. But I now have made a name doing this. Not something I even enjoy doing even after doing it. But so, life takes you in many directions. Point is to embrace all of those things and carry on. I mean, how would you have known that you were going to be in the podcast business, right? A few years ago, you didn't even know what a podcast was, but here you are.
Right. Like exactly the way that you're saying, just enjoy the journey, let life happen to you. And I think leave cynicism for much later. At 20,
Why cynicism?
25, I don't know. At some
Why
point,
cynicism in 95? I mean, I know lots of people who are quite energetic and doing all kinds of new things in their 70s, 80s, 90s. And that's what keeps life interesting, and there is no reason to be cynical at all.
Absolutely.
And by the way, this is not a new phenomenon at all. I grew up in the 1980s Kolkata, and I was surrounded by this people in their teens or early 20s who were cynical like this. There's a Bengali word for this called atel. So these atels had a problem for every solution. And, they had this cynical pseudo-intellectual style. And, one of the reasons I am the way I am is maybe a response to that early thing. And they used to dominate colleges and general public conversation. The good news is that this kind of class that used to exist in many universities, even do today, that class has actually lost its social power. If you go to an average university in India, you will find that the cool people in the campus is a guy who's trying to do some startup. So that old, cynical, activist type, pseudo-intellectual class, they are no longer the cool people in our campuses. Ironically, this is flipped onto in Western campuses, they are now the cool guys. And one part of their decline is this phenomena.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic to talk to you. Thank you so much. I'm sure the viewers have enjoyed this. Thank you so much.
It's been a joy. Thank you.
Investment in securities market are subject to market risks. Read all the related documents carefully before investing. Please read the risk disclosure documents carefully before investing in equity shares, derivatives, mutual fund, and or other instruments traded on the stock exchanges.